Hello, my name is Caleb Burton, and I'm coming to you live from my honeymoon in Vegas. I am bringing you the story of Lake Flores. Right here, here's an illustration. And here it goes. Abigail and Elizabeth had been best friends their entire life. They did everything together. Every birthday they spent doing the same things, sleepovers, late night movies. They spent every summer and any day they could during school at beautiful Lake Forest. Abigail brought her music and Elizabeth would bring her books. But no matter what they did or where they were in life, they promised that they would spend every summer on this lake. Every school year they were in the same class and spent whatever time they could together. So when they started high school, they knew nothing could tear them apart until one day something changed. Abigail decided that she wanted to join the cheerleading team and told Elizabeth that she should join with her. Even though Elizabeth was shy and didn't want to, she decided that because Abigail was her best friend, she would join and be supportive. They practiced together for weeks before the tryouts, and Abigail had it down. Elizabeth was not happy with what she had learned and decided not to try out. Here's my first illustration. As the weeks went by and weekends got canceled, Abigail and Elizabeth began spending less and less time together. Elizabeth wanted to do something to take the time so she wouldn't feel as lonely without her best friend, so she joined a book club. Because outside hanging out with her best friend, reading was her favorite thing to do. Weeks became months, and before they knew it, they had surrounded themselves with new friends and new lives. Both friends began to forget the bond that they once had with each other. One day, during lunch period, Abigail and Elizabeth crossed paths and smiled, but no words were exchanged. Both were hurt by this and decided maybe it was time for a change. Abigail decided that it was best for both of them to move on in their new life without each other. On the other side, Elizabeth decided to try harder to make time for her best friend and that things needed to change, and she would make the effort in changing it the next day. Second illustration. The next day at school, Elizabeth went looking for Abigail to fix the friendship that they used to have. She figured with summer only weeks away, they needed to start making new plans to go to the lake before all the good spots were taken. When she finally found Abigail, she was talking to a group of her new friends about the great spot she knew about that they could go for summer break. Elizabeth walked up to Abigail and told her she wanted to talk, but Abigail ignored her and continued to talk with her friends. When Elizabeth finally began to hear what Abigail wanted to take her new friends, she could hardly stand it herself. Her best friend was planning a trip to the lake without her and with a new group of friends. How could she do this to me, thought Elizabeth. She walked away realizing that her friendship was beginning to end and there was nothing she could do about it anymore. Abigail began to feel bad about the way that she had treated her old friend, but remembered it was for the best. They were both doing so well in their new lives, and they didn't need to ruin it for each other. Plans began to get exciting, and she could start remembering how much she loved Lake Flores and how much her new friends would love. They would love it as well when she took them there. She began to forget all the old memories. While getting ready to go, Elizabeth started to think about how her new friends would like the lake. She was sure it would be fun. She sure loved it because it was quiet and a relaxing place, and the perfect place to read. And she was sure her friends from the book club would also think so as well. After some thought, Elizabeth began to wonder what happened to her old friendship and how they could let themselves fall so far apart. Her thoughts quickly changed when she remembered how Abigail treated her and was thankful her new friends would never do the same. Here is my third illustration. I know these aren't pretty, but it's getting the job done. When Elizabeth and her book club friends got to Lake Forest, she noticed something was completely different. There were trucks full of hazardous waste driving through what now was an empty lake. What happened to her favorite place? Why had it been emptied, and what would come of it? Her friends started to get mad at this place and at Elizabeth for taking them there and wasting their time. They asked her why she would consider this the best place to spend their summer, so she tried to explain that this lake used to be full and beautiful. When she was explaining, she looked over and saw that her old friend Abigail was trying to explain the same thing to her new friends as well. Then she watched as Abigail got back into the car to go home and figure out a new place to spend the rest of her summer with her friends. While watching her friends drive away, Elizabeth started to get angry at the fact that the one thing that was left of her friendship was gone, so she decided to find out the reasons behind the lake. If it was the last thing she did, she would find out what was going on here. She told her friends that they could go on without her and that she had some things to do and figure out. Elizabeth walked up to one of the men cleaning up some trash and asked him what had happened here. He began to explain, and she learned that the lake was filled with waste from a nearby production plant and that it started to dump in the lake last year, and it was so dirty to let people swim in. She found out that the city had cut costs to clean up the lake, so all that there was left to do was to drain it so people couldn't get in and get sick. After being home for a few days, Elizabeth began thinking of what she could do to help. Why had the city cut costs for such an important thing? Then it hit her. She needed to raise money to get the lake back to where it needed to be, but she would need some help. When Abigail got home, she decided she would stay home instead of going to a different place with all of her friends. She was so upset about the lake, she couldn't think about having fun anywhere else. Her friends were sad to leave her, but they understood why she was so sad about the lake. She started to wonder what had happened to them, what happened for them to shut down the entire lake, while her thoughts started to drift and go back to all the amazing summers she had with Elizabeth, and begin to wonder why she thought it was the best place to spend summer without her. She heard a knock on the door. Abigail walked over to the door and saw Elizabeth standing in the doorway with tears in her eyes. She explained her plan to Abigail and told her she needed her help. All she had to do was get all her friends to be on the same page as she was. They needed to save the lake, and all they would have to do was come up with the money to save it. Even though it was a lot of money to raise, they both believed they could do it. After a lot of thought and planning, they came up with a plan to save the lake. They would fundraise and clean cars until they had enough money to save their favorite place. After 6 long weeks of car washes and fundraising through the entire community, they were able to get enough money to save the lake. This whole thing was able to bring 2 friends back together, and not only did they save their favorite summer spot, they saved their friendship as well. Last drawing. This concludes my story of Lake Flores by Caleb Burton, and I hope you have a great summer.